Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your day and St. Patty's Day to join us for information about the West Reserve Drive Corridor Planning Study. We're really appreciative of your willingness to participate in this virtual platform. We'd certainly much rather see all of your smiling faces in person, but we also, meanwhile, understand that this corridor has a lot of engaged residents and stakeholders, and we definitely want to collect your input in the meantime. So considering that, we'll use Zoom to meet for now and keep our fingers crossed that we'll be back to meeting in person very soon. So to that end, I'll go over a couple housekeeping items as we get started. We'll be fielding questions using the Q&A function. That's the button that looks like speech bubbles at the bottom of your screen. Questions that are applicable to the general public will be addressed live during this meeting. But to be respectful of everyone's time, if your inquiry is specific to your property, a study team member will follow up with you directly in the next few days. Please feel free to add any other comments that you wish be heard by the study team using the Q&A button as well. To have an accurate record of all of your feedback, we do need to funnel all the questions and comments through that Q&A function and won't be using the raise hand tool for today's meeting. And following the meeting, you are always welcome to offer thoughts and ask questions using the contact information that we'll provide at the end of the presentation. And finally, it is important to note that this meeting is being recorded and will be added to the study website for future reference for anyone who wasn't able to attend today. So please feel free to direct your friends and neighbors to that in case they weren't able to attend today. And all of MDT's efforts, including corridor planning studies like this one, contribute towards the goal of Vision Zero, working towards zero fatalities and zero serious injuries on Montana roads. So moving on, this meeting is held pursuant to Title VI of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which ensures that no person shall be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or otherwise be subjected to discrimination on the basis of a protected status under any MDT program or activity. So with that, I will pass the baton over to Jacqueline to offer a welcome and an introduction to this presentation.
Thank you, Lisa. My name is Jacqueline Smith, and I am the Missoula District Pre-Construction Engineer for MDT. And I want to start by just echoing what Lisa said and just really thank everybody for taking the time to join us on this St. Patrick's Day or later afternoon, early evening, and we just really appreciate your involvement. We do wish that it could have been in person, but again, just we're not able to go to that stage yet. But fortunately, we do have this Zoom platform that has been actually pretty successful this last year in helping us be able to reach out to the public and get feedback and share project information. So again, just thank you everybody for taking the time to join us. I'm going to go ahead and introduce the rest of the team that is here with us today. And I will just, as you call your name, if you could unmute and say your name and what agency or company you're with, and then I'll go ahead and get a little bit into what a corridor study is. So Vicki.
Hi, I'm Vicki Cernich, and I am a planner for MDT, specifically in the Missoula District, and I'm the project manager of the corridor study.
Thank you, Vicki. Cody.
Thanks, Jacqueline. This is Cody Salo, and I am a consultant for Dowell, and I am working with Vicki and the MDT team, including Jacqueline and others, to forward this corridor study, and I will be the project manager for Dowell.
Thank you. Lisa.
Hi again, everyone. My name is Lisa Olmsted, and I am also with Dowell, and I am the public involvement person for this study.
Thank you. Sarah.
Sarah Patterson. I'm a traffic engineer with Dowell.
Thank you. And Emily.
Emily Peterson. I am the environmental manager here at Dowell, working to collect information on environmental conditions for this study.
Thank you, Emily. So for those of you that are familiar with this area, you know Kalispell, especially north of this study area, is seeing high growth. And because of that, there's increased congestion occurring along and around Reserve Drive here. And so we're doing this corridor study to help us identify what the needs and the long-term needs, not just needs, long-term needs are for this corridor, and help us develop a plan to address those needs. The study is going to be including lots of different considerations, including this public involvement, also some agency input, finding out what kind of financial feasibility we have, identify funding, look at the environmental constraints we have in the area, and yeah, just work towards finding a solution for the issues that we're currently seeing out here. I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Vicki, and she's going to expand more on the corridor study, and we'll keep progressing with the presentation. So again, thank you everybody, and Vicki, go for it.
Thanks, Jacqueline. So a little background information about corridor studies. In 2007, MDT developed an official process for linking planning studies with environmental reviews. This process was developed in close coordination with our federal partners at the Federal Highway Administration and with resource agencies. So everyone involved was aware of and comfortable with the outcomes of the process and the use of those outcomes directly into the project development process. Over the years, we've found that it's saved millions in time and money. So the things that corridor studies do, and kind of what a corridor study is, it's a high-level examination of the study area, and we're going to consider the social and the economic and the environmental effects early in the process. The study involves looking at existing and projected conditions of the area, including conducting reviews of safety, some operations, the geometric conditions out there of the roadway, and environmental resources to identify any constraints or fatal flaws, once again, early in the process. The information, along with the input from the public and the resource agencies, helps clearly define the needs and objectives of the study area. So like you guys participating tonight. The corridor study also provides a link between early transportation planning and environmental compliance efforts for project development. Coordination between the planning and project development staff ensures that recommendations from the study transition smoothly into a future project. A lot of times we hear, why are you doing a study when we know you need to do it? We need a project out here. But we get a lot of benefits from corridor studies, and those benefits include providing a suite of improvements, and examples of those would be, short-term improvements and mid-term improvements. So it might be finishing out some sidewalks in one area, maybe could be a short-term improvement, some intersection improvements is short-term, as opposed to something a mid-term or long-term, like a total reconstruction of a roadway. The corridor study also provides a basis for the elimination of alternatives. And it's easy to screen out alternatives and or fatal flaws based on financial and environmental constraints during the planning process instead of later in the project development process. Corridor studies also provide for early identification of potential transportation improvements and the costs associated with those improvements and the funding viability. Studies also enhance the ability to identify fundable segments that serve independent utility for implementation. Early consultation and documentation of public involvement helps inform project development and provides early and continuous public involvement with the public, like tonight, stakeholders and resource agencies. And like I've said, since MDT has implemented this process, we've been really successful in not needing to complete higher level environmental review processes, such as environmental assessments and environmental impact statements, which, as you well know, with the Kalispell bypass can take years. And thereby it saves a lot of time and money during the project development. And then also the corridor study process provides a smooth transition into project development. It's used to better scope projects before moving into development. For example, we've already gone through a range of alternatives, and that range has been reduced. There's been early communication with the public and the resource agencies, and that enables us to identify issues and concerns early on. Fatal flaws have been identified and avoided, and mitigation opportunities have been recognized. So that's the corridor study in a nutshell. I'm going to pass it off to Cody, and he's going to go through the agenda.
All right, thanks, Vicki. So here's what we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about the goals and purpose of the study. We're going to give you an overview of the existing physical features and traffic conditions, and then we'll get into some of the environmental characteristics that we've noted out in the corridor. And then we'll talk about some of the next steps in the study process before opening up for questions. So let's get into the goals and purpose of the study. You know, like Vicki had said, we start off with a high-level scan of the study area. And with all that information and input that we gather from the public and stakeholders and agencies, we then can take a look and summarize that into some needs and objectives, which are basically statements that we create through collaborative input that kind of drive forward the study process into identifying improvement options. And like Vicki had mentioned, these improvement options might be a short-term fix for some sidewalk connectivity, all the way up to full-blown reconstruction and replacement of a roadway. So with that, we will estimate costs, we'll assess potential impacts, including environmental impacts, and so forth. And we'll take a look at the overall feasibility and constructability of potential options. With all that information, we'll compile all that and all the data that we've used to get to that point, and we'll kind of package it all up, ready for the environmental process if some sort of a project moves forward out of the study. So let's review the study area and some of that background information I was talking about, and share some of that with you. So the study area is basically from the US 93 intersection, extending all the way to the east to the US 2 intersection, and then a segment about a half-mile long along Whitefish Stage Road to the north, and then about 300 or so feet south of West Reserve on Whitefish Stage Road to fully encompass that intersection. And when we do a corridor study, we usually have some sort of a buffer. And in this case, we're using a 250-foot buffer on both sides. So it's a total of 500 feet that basically extends all the way down all of these alignments that we're taking a look at. So let's get into a little bit of the background. Jacqueline already touched on some of this. This particular corridor, West Reserve Drive, serves a wide range of uses, including commercial, agricultural, some industrial, lots of residential. And we understand there is a lot of rapid growth in the Flathead Valley that's all contributing to the traffic congestion that you all see out there on the corridor today. So we fully understand that the traffic is becoming an issue. We understand that there is various drivers of growth. And so we're taking a look at that with this study. So let's get into the study schedule for just a minute, and I'll explain the process a little further. So the planning studies typically begin with a review of the environmental factors. We call that an environmental scan. And then we also compile existing and projected conditions. And that is basically the physical features and characteristics out there on the corridor. We take a look at the traffic and so forth, and we project that out to a future date. And in this case, we're looking at 2040 as our future date. We take all that information and we compile it into a couple of reports, and then we share that with everybody, including you, the public. And that takes us to PI meeting number 1 on the schedule. And that's happening today. And the intent of this meeting is to share as much information as we can with you based on the research that we've conducted, and then ask you for input back. So part of what we're looking for here is if we've missed anything, any data or some other piece of information that we may have overlooked. It's amazing what we get from the public. And so it's really important that we get that feedback from you during the process. From that input, then the next step for us will be to develop needs and objective statements. And that's basically us identifying some kind of broad overarching goals for the corridor. And out of those statements then and goals, we can then move into identifying improvement options, whether it be something to do with safety, something to do with traffic operations. It could be something to have to do with environmental resources. So from that, we will generate a whole number of different ideas. And then we basically work through a screening process to throw out the ones that aren't any good or the ones that aren't practical or possible. So once we get to a point where we've got something that is worth sharing as far as improvements that could be done to the corridor, we come back to you at PI meeting number 2, which we're anticipating is probably in the July timeframe. And we'll share all of that with the public, the agencies, and the stakeholders to get some more feedback. And we'll kind of use your input and ideas to further refine all of those improvement ideas that we've come up with. And then from there, we will compile all that into a final corridor study report. So let's take a look at the existing and projected conditions. So first off, let's talk about the roadways and bridges. Specifically, West Reserve Drive, beginning at the US 93 intersection, is technically a 5-lane roadway. There's 2 lanes in each direction with some turn lanes. Of course, it splits up into more turn lanes, so it's kind of a number of things going on there, but it is a wider section there. And that continues all the way to the east to Hutton Ranch Road, where it becomes narrower and it becomes a 3-lane roadway. And that pretty well continues all the way to US 2. And so that's definitely what we would consider to be an urban section. You've seen the curb and gutter. It has some sidewalk, and we'll talk about that in just a second. Whitefish Stage Road, however, is a 2-lane roadway, and it's more of a typical kind of rural roadway where you have ditches. There's no curb and gutter, there's no sidewalk. So it's a little different. The pavement condition along West Reserve is fair on the west side, and it's basically what we would consider to be poor condition on the east. So basically at Whitefish Stage Road as a center point, we have fair on the west and we have poor on the east. From a maintenance standpoint, I think it's important to understand responsibilities here. So MDT is actually responsible for West Reserve Drive, including the plowing and things like that. They're also responsible for Whitefish Stage Road to the north, but Whitefish Stage Road to the south is locally maintained. So there is a break point there at the intersection heading south. There are 2 bridges on the corridor. One's over the Stillwater River and the other's over the Whitefish River. Both of those bridges were built in 1983 and since then have seen some rehabilitation. And basically what we're saying is there's some improvement. That includes some new barrier, some new guardrail. The decks have had some work. You've probably noticed there are some pothole-ish issues on some of the decks. And so those are being maintained and repaired consistently. What I would say though is that structurally, both of those bridges are what we would consider good condition. So they're fairly sound. We also took a look at the sidewalks and the driveways along the corridor. And one thing that we noted is that the sidewalk connectivity is lacking. So starting at the US 93 intersection, there is sidewalk on both sides, north and south, and those will continue over to the east. But by the time you get to the Stillwater Bridge, the north sidewalk falls off and we're left with the south walk continuing on for quite some distance. It's actually continuous all the way to the Whitefish River Bridge. And shortly after that bridge, though, it terminates, it ends, and then the sidewalk jumps back to the north, and there is no official crosswalk or any sort of feature there to help people across. So we would call that a disconnected sidewalk. So we've noted that. We also noted that the east segment of the corridor is different in that there is a lower speed limit and there's also a high number of driveways, both residential and commercial, that access West Reserve Drive directly from their properties. So that is a fundamental difference than what you might see over on the west segment of the corridor. So with that, I will turn it over to Sarah, and she is going to talk a little bit about the traffic and some of the analysis that we've done to date.
All right, so this slide here shows our average daily traffic volumes in the existing condition. And basically these are vehicles per day on each road in the study area. And as you can see, we have about 18 to 20,000 vehicles per day on the west end of Reserve. And then east of Whitefish Stage Road, volumes are a little bit lower with 13 to 15,000 vehicles per day. And as a point of reference, the planning level capacity of a 3-lane road, a road with 1 lane in each direction and a center turn lane, is about 18,300 vehicles per day. So that segment west of Whitefish Stage Road is operating at capacity. And that's evident just from looking at the PM peak hour today, where we see quite a bit of congestion and delay in that segment, particularly on the eastbound approach, heading toward the Whitefish Stage Road intersection. We do see long queues during the PM peak hour. So we've looked at historic traffic counts on the corridor, and we've also looked at planning studies in Kalispell to estimate a future growth on the corridor for traffic. And we've estimated about 2.4% growth per year will occur between now and 2040. And with that 2.4% growth, we're expecting about 30 to 32,000 vehicles per day on the west end of Reserve in 2040. And then on the east end of Reserve, about 22 to 25,000 vehicles per day. So we've looked at the intersection level of service in the PM peak hour, and level of service is a qualitative measure of the quality of traffic flow, ranges from A through F, with E and F representing failing conditions. And for this traffic analysis, we did take traffic counts at all 7 intersections here back in October 2020. And we acknowledge that with the existing COVID-19 pandemic, we do have different travel patterns. We have more people working from home. So given that information, we've compared those October 2020 counts to recent historic counts in the last 2 years. We had those recent historic counts at the 3 major intersections, US 93, US 2, and Whitefish Stage. And from comparing those counts, we found that the AM peak hour is about 10% lower due to COVID traffic impacts. However, the PM peak hour is only about 3% lower, so not much of a difference in the change in traffic in the PM peak on Reserve. So using that information, we use the historic counts at those 3 major intersections, and then for the other intersections where we didn't have historic data, we factored up those traffic counts just to reflect the impacts of COVID on our traffic volumes. So looking at the results here, you can see we have 2 intersections in the existing condition that are failing. Those are Whitefish Stage Road, operating at level of service E. Like I mentioned before, we do see quite a bit of delay and queuing occurring in the PM peak hour. And we also have high delay at Country Way. So Country Way is a stop controlled intersection. So the delay at a stop controlled intersection is measured for the vehicle sitting at the stop sign waiting for a gap in traffic. So it's measured differently than at a traffic signal. So we do see high delay for those vehicles on that Country Way approach. And then for our 2 major intersections on either end of the corridor, the 93 and US 2 signals, those are both operating at level of service D, so they're approaching unstable flow. And along with the Home Depot stop controlled intersection that's also operating at level of service D. When we forecast out to 2040, we see that all intersections are expected to fail. And that's what this project hopes to address, or this study, I should say. So this shows the crash density along the corridor, as well as the location of the suspected serious injuries. And what we see here, we looked at 10 years of data. We see a higher crash density on the west end of the corridor, which is where we have our higher traffic volumes. Based on that analysis of 10 years of crash data, we saw that the number of crashes per year has doubled over the last 10 years, from about 50 crashes per year to 100 crashes per year. And a couple of reasons for the increase in traffic crashes. First of all, we have seen quite a bit of development on the last 10 years on this corridor. Hutton Ranch Road was completed in 2012, that intersection. And then we have the Kalispell bypass completed in 2017. And those 2 intersections have just added conflicting turning movements to the corridor, which naturally increases the number of crashes on the corridor. And then we've also seen an increase in traffic congestion in the last 10 years, which contributes to the increase in crashes. We saw that when we looked at crashes by time of day, the most crashes occurred between 3 and 6 p.m., which is when our traffic congestion occurs. And then we also see the majority of the crashes are rear end. which is a very common crash type at a signalized intersection in congested conditions. And then the other thing I wanted to point out on this figure is the Whitefish Stage Road intersection. We do have a higher crash density there, and I wanted to point out that we had a higher crash rate as well, and that's the number of crashes per vehicles at that intersection. That intersection stood out, and a part of the, I think, contributing factor for standing out with a higher crash rate is that we do have higher traffic congestion at that intersection. So that's all I had to share for the traffic analysis, but I'll hand it back to Cody and he'll finish off this section.
Great, thanks, Sarah. From our review of the study area, we identified some key takeaways to consider as the study moves forward. And those include some physical features. As I noted before, there's some closely spaced driveways on the east end of the corridor that's also coupled with some lower speeds. We have some gaps in sidewalk connectivity all along the corridor. The pavement's not in great condition. As far as the traffic conditions are concerned, we understand that West Reserve Drive is near capacity, especially on that west end, and that we currently have a couple of intersections that are already failing. And then based on the growth projections that we have, we also anticipate that all 7 of those intersections would fail by 2040. And from a safety standpoint, we noted that the crashes have doubled in the last 10 years, and that's really a concern that we need to take forward into the study. We also noted, like Sarah said, that the Whitefish Stage Road intersection had the highest crash rate, which is also concerning to us as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Emily so she can get into some of the environmental overview.
Thanks, Cody. So as part of this study, we conducted a planning level overview of the existing physical, biological, social and cultural resources within the study corridor to get a better idea of what some of the potential environmental constraints and opportunities might be. The resources that we looked at included socioeconomic conditions, land use and farmland. We looked at wildlife occurrences and threatened and endangered species, wetlands and floodplains, cultural resources, and hazardous material sites. So I'm just going to briefly discuss some of the primary conditions that we identified. So we did look at census data, and as Cody and Jacqueline have already mentioned, Flathead County and this area is certainly seeing an increase in growth, and this increase is expected to continue for the next 20 years. We also looked at income in this area, and we noticed that Flathead County was quite a bit different from the state of Montana in that it had a high concentration of low and middle income households, but it also had a very high concentration of very high income households, which is indicative of a recreation resort type community. We also looked at populations that would be under, that would fall under environmental justice requirements and executive orders. These types of populations include low income and minority populations. And through our census review, we did not find any of these high concentrations within the study corridor that could be adversely affected by any of the projects that we carry forward from the study. Land use was certainly a big one within this study corridor. As you can see from this figure, a lot of the land has a zoning designation to it, with quite a bit of the undeveloped land and farmland being designated as for future residential and commercial use. There's also the Kalispell North Town Center, which is a planned urban development that will be coming to the area. So certainly all of these changes in land use are going to create quite a bit more traffic for the area. You'll also see along the Whitefish River, you'll see the future annexation boundary for the city of Kalispell. So at some time in the future, more than half of the study corridor will be annexed into the city of Kalispell. On the aquatic resource and I guess the biological side of things, there's 2 main rivers that cross the study corridor, the Stillwater River and the Whitefish River. Both of these rivers are designated impaired waters, and they are impaired primarily because they don't support aquatic life beneficial uses. And that primarily has to do with the amount of sediment within both of the rivers. The Stillwater River does have a set maximum pollutant levels that can be discharged into the river on a given day. Whitefish River, those levels are currently under review, so they haven't been set yet. Both rivers are within 100-year floodplains, so certainly as we look at improvement options, encroachment into floodplains will be one of the things that we look at. And there are, of course, always wetlands along these rivers. So looking at where we can avoid or minimize impacts to wetlands will also be considered. Both of these rivers also have bull trout, which is a threatened species under the Endangered Species Act. And so as we move forward with improvement options, if we're looking at crossing structures or how our improvements will affect water quality, those are things we'll certainly need to look at in terms of bull trout. And then again, that purple line along the Whitefish River, the annexation boundary for the city of Kalispell. So anything that gets put into the city will of course have to follow their stormwater water quality requirements that are outlined in the State Department of Environmental Quality. So that gives you an idea of some of the environmental conditions that we've identified. And with that, I will turn it back to Cody.
Okay, let's talk about the next steps in the corridor planning process. So we have several milestones coming up. So right now we're gathering input from public agencies, stakeholders and so forth. And our plan at this point is to complete the existing and projected conditions report. And again, that's the physical characteristics of the corridor and the traffic conditions and so forth. And so that's partly why we're here tonight, is to get some input from you to see if we've missed anything. And then our next step will be to identify the needs and objectives for the corridor, which will then lead into a collaborative process between our team and MDT and others to generate potential improvement options. And again, these are all concepts. These are just ideas that we're going to create as a team to try to address some of those needs and objectives for the corridor. And then we'll plan to meet again later in the summer, like I had said earlier, probably in the July timeframe, to hear from you again and share all of that information. So I'm going to turn the presentation over to Lisa, because I want her to spend a little bit of time to discuss the various ways that you can all get involved with the study process.
Thanks, Cody. So you've heard it a couple times already, but hopefully one of your key takeaways from this conversation tonight is that your input is important. Your comments are really imperative to this study process. So wanted to touch on the various opportunities for you to contribute to this effort. The first is the study does have a website with some more information. You can actually review the documents and you can contribute comments to that page. That's the second hyperlink that's provided here on this screen. There will be a second public meeting coming up later in the study process, so do stay tuned for that, because we certainly will want your feedback at that stage too. Feel free to reach out directly to our project team, both Vicky with MDT and Cody, the DAL project manager. Their direct contact information is provided here on this screen. And in addition to that, we do have a virtual platform active for you to provide feedback to as well. So I'm going to steal control from Cody temporarily and share my screen so you can see what that looks like. And so what this is a platform to provide feedback. It does also offer another opportunity to learn about the study, provides an overview of the corridor. Down here at the bottom, there are some frequently asked questions, so you can dive into some information there. We will post information about the next virtual public meeting, well, maybe virtual. The next one, but it will be posted here. And in addition, there are 2 interactive pieces for you to participate in for us to collect your input. The first is a public forum where you can go on and add comments. You can have a dialogue. You can vote up particular comments that you think are especially relevant to your perspective. And additionally, there is an interactive map where you can provide geographically associated comments. So to use this, you can zoom in and move around and look at specific features along the corridor. And then there are these little icons at the top, and they are related to ideas, make a comment, something I like, safety concerns. So you pick whichever is the most relevant to your comment, you click it, and you can just drag it down onto the map to make a particular note. So for example, if you think there is a safety concern at this particular intersection, you just drop it right there and add your comment. And that's a great way for you to provide really direct feedback to the study team. So Cody, you can go ahead and take over sharing the screen again. But as we move on, please put your questions or comments into the Q&A function. We did receive one question in advance of the meeting regarding the sidewalk connectivity. And Cody, do you want to touch on that?
Sure. So there was a comment or a question about the sidewalk connectivity along the corridor. And like I had mentioned earlier, we have noted that there is a lack of connection on both sides, both the north and the south. So one of the things we're looking at is, what an improvement could be to potentially make that connected. And so as we move into the needs and objectives of the study, if that's one of the things that we think is driving part of the issues out there on the corridor, then we'll identify some options then to address that. So that's actually going to be part of our next steps. Like I had said before, once we create these needs and objectives and determine what those goals might be for the corridor study, then we will move forward to really identify pinpointed, targeted improvements at various locations to try to address those sorts of things. So we are very aware of that lack of sidewalk and definitely understand that that could be an issue for people.
So at this point, if you have any questions, do put them into the Q&A. We don't have any other questions at this point.
Lisa, I might just add, and I kind of mentioned this earlier, public involvement is really important to the study process. And so, we compile a lot of information and we do a lot of homework, but at the end of the day, we understand that we sometimes miss little nuances and little details. And, a lot of these folks that are probably in the audience today spend a lot of time on this corridor. And so, if you have any ideas or input or think we need to pay attention to something, or maybe we missed something altogether, we'd really appreciate some sort of a comment, whether it's either today during the presentation, or if you want to drop an email to Vicki or myself, or jump on any of these platforms to comment, we'd really appreciate that. This is an important step in the process.
And the point, there's many ways to contribute thoughts. The comment form on the website, the interactive map, the direct phone or email. And the whole point is there is no wrong answer. We just want to hear your perspectives. It's incredibly important to a study effort like this.
And I would just like to add something that Lisa said about the documents being on the study website. I know that a lot of this, it's all second nature to us, but there's a lot of information that we presented tonight, and there's an environmental scan and an existing and projected conditions report on the study website, and you can see the link. And take your time, read it, take a look at the appendices. If you have any questions, please let us know. That also helps us, especially if we think we've covered everything and because you live in the community, of something that we've missed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, we did get one other question. Will the railroad crossing be eliminated during this process?
Maybe I'll take the first swing at that, Lisa. So we have taken a look at the railroad crossing. It was actually improved not too long ago. It does have some warning devices, which are basically for pedestrians to use that more safely. We've looked at the volume of traffic on the rail. There are 2 to 3, I believe, trains per day on average that use that. So we kind of understand the frequency of crossings at that location. So moving forward, we will be looking at that as I guess part of the constraints and or opportunities that are out there on the corridor. At this point, we can't really say one way or another if there's going to be anything done specifically at the rail crossing, but we'll definitely take it into consideration and take a look at that further.
Okay, and we just got another question. How should a landowner who plans to develop in the near future proceed? How do they determine how this project might impact the future of their development? Vicki, do you want to chime in on that, or?
Well, I think it's a fairly difficult question. You know, this is just a study, and the hope is to come out of this study with a suite of improvements to move forward and to help solve a problem. You know, I don't think that there's a way that we can, it is far too early to tell what will happen.
Vicki, if you don't mind, I'll add on to that too.
Oh, please do.
If you are a developer that's familiar with working with MDT or along MDT routes, you'll go through our systems impact process just like you would any other time. And that'll be reviewed by our internal staff and knowing that we've got this study going on in the area. So there's no need for you to be put on hold or speed up your process. You just continue to work with us as you have other times. And if you're not familiar with that process, let us know and we can send you the information on how you need to proceed.
Thanks, Jacqueline. One more question. At what point in the timeline will the businesses be brought into the data gathering of the study? Vicki, do you want to touch on that?
Sure. And you know, right now, I think some of the businesses are part of our stakeholder list. And certainly if there are any businesses that we've missed, I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Lisa, a lot of the stakeholders are adjacent properties. So if you're a business that's adjacent to the study area, you would have received a stakeholder email. And if you are not, please let us know and we can get you added to the list.
Yes, that's exactly correct. So yeah, Ken, we can certainly add you to the stakeholder list if you did not already receive a direct letter in the mail as a result of this public meeting. And that way you are included in future study communications. And there was a follow-up comment to that property owner. He said he would potentially have growth plans, number of planned employees, cargo trucks, et cetera, information on those things to provide. So that would be very helpful. So one of our study team members can reach out to you directly. So we can linger for a little while longer to catch any other questions or comments. Like we mentioned formerly, if you do have any comments, you're welcome to put them into that Q&A function as well. Doesn't have to be a question. And we still have the contact information up on the screen, so feel free to screenshot that or jot that down so you have it. No more questions are coming in, but please do ask any questions if you have any questions or comments or think of anything that your neighbors may know. Like we mentioned previously, this meeting is being recorded. And it will be added to the study website too. So if you wish to reference back or have a neighbor or friend, business partner who you think would be interested in the information, please feel free to direct them to the video.
You know, and Lisa, I might just add, as part of our study process, we will always take comments. So even if someone wakes up in the middle of the night and has an idea or thinks of something and wants to quickly type us a note, we have all these different methods. So we're more than willing to take that. into consideration, and just know that we're always open, and throughout the whole process, you can certainly comment.
That always happens to me. You are thinking about it, simmering on it, letting the marbles roll around in your head, and the next day, or then the next time you're driving down the corridor, you're like, oh, looking at it from a different perspective. And now I have a thought. That's what we need.
Yep, exactly.
Well, again, let me reiterate how appreciative we are of everyone for taking time out of your evening to join us, for being so engaged in this corridor, and for being so engaged in this study effort. We certainly appreciate the comments, the feedback, and would again reiterate how much we appreciate any feedback you can provide to the study team. Vicki, do you want to say anything in closing?
No, we really appreciate you taking time out of your evening. And hopefully the corned beef and cabbage isn't burnt by this point. Please, oh please, take a look at the website, play around on the interactive map. It is great fun. Give us your comment or your questions. We'd really love to hear from you. Thanks again for taking the time.
And Jacqueline, do you want to say anything? Would you also like to endorse how fun the interactive map is?
Yes, I'll second all of that. No, just thank you everybody for taking the time to join us, and really we welcome any input you have, any questions you have, any comments. I know we're sounding like a broken record at this point with that emphasis, but we really do mean it, and we want to get this right when we do actually get a construction project going. And so now is the time to get all this input. So don't hesitate to reach out to us and share anything that you may have. So thank you.
Perfect. Well, again, if you do have any other questions or comments, please feel free to send them. Otherwise, happy St. Patty's Day, and we will go ahead and end this meeting and set you all free.